And I think Dane and Hughes really touched on that too, because remember he said they would do all these drills for kickoff return and punt return, where he'd like land his back and then boom, the punt's up and you get up and you have to figure out where the ball's at. He's like, they made it so hard in practice that when you got in the game, it was easy because you got to watch the whole punt develop. You
Yeah.
got to get your bearings. And so I was like, yeah, I don't know if we really made practice harder than the games. We tried to simulate what it was, but games were definitely harder than practice.
Welcome to the Gallery and Hurley Unfiltered podcast, Iowa Football Rewind.
Subscribe now on YouTube or your favorite podcast player to get a behind the scenes look that you won't find anywhere else.
All right, tonight's show, we're going to shift gears a little bit. Brian and I are going to discuss future episodes. We are about 20 shows in. Brian, tell me about the first 20 shows. What do you think? What was good? What was bad? What surprised you?
It's been really cool just to reconnect with guys that we haven't talked to in a long time. Sometimes we'll see them at games or see something on social media, but really to kind of see where everyone's at and then relive some memories and then have this connection going forward with them, I think has been really cool. I think that's was something I hoped would happen, but it's been really cool to see and just to see where everyone's kind of ended up. I think this time period is really cool that it's been 20, 30 years, maybe more for some guys, to now they've kind of lived a significant amount of their life and can look back at this time and really reflect differently than had we just interviewed them 5 years out of school or even 10 years. So I think that's been kind of the first thing that popped in my mind.
That's great. I think part of what I realized or kind of reminded me of the class of people that we had the experience with. They're just the really good down to earth people. A lot of people turned into coaches, helping people, helping young kids. That part, super humble. I think there was, Matt Sherman was talking about how he was okay in high school, and he, from Phil, one of our other episodes coming up, he remembers it as he was tearing up the state, right? He was throwing the ball all over the place and that stuff. So I think that was a great reminder of just, the class of people. I think also their life stories and how they got there. I think once we were in school, we necessarily didn't know those as well, and we didn't dive into those pieces. I think we were forward looking and we were always building for something, but we didn't necessarily, we knew where people were from and their families and that part, but didn't really dive into the how did you get here? What did you do? Those pieces. And then also, I think some of the injury stuff where guys, were really struggling with injuries and being out of the team and disconnected and that part. And just, were we supportive as a team and teammates and that kind of thing, I think is an interesting thought as well.
Yeah, I think we got like the newspaper clipping version of some of our teammates. Like I would read who we recruited each year, who was going to be joining the team. I'd look at their stats or honors, say, oh, this guy looks good. This guy looks good. Then you come in and you meet them and you know their hometown and maybe where they're at. But like if they're from Texas, I didn't know where in Texas. I'd never been to Texas. And now, looking back, I've traveled a lot now, so I know where that town is now, and I can get on a better understanding of that. But at the next level of detail, like what was their experience? How did they even get here? We just saw them as signees or walk-ons, right? It's that their story of what led them to Iowa, and then the stuff that we didn't see in the training room, the difficulties maybe with school, maybe with adapting to Iowa. If they were showing up and they were in a good mood, like, oh, cool, everything's cool. And now looking back, I wish I'd have dug in a little deeper and kind of said, how are you really doing? Like, we grew up in Iowa, so this is no big change for us, but I didn't really understand how much of a change it was for everyone outside of the state or not from the Midwest. So I think that's come through a lot.
Yeah, you really get to understand, the difference of what people where they came from and where they ended up, right? It's Larry Blue being in Long Island and Hempstead. I mean, I was in Hempstead for a while or nearby there, so it's a world away, right? It's different cultures, more diversity, all these different things that you necessarily wouldn't really understand until you were put in those positions, and to be expected to perform as well, right? Here, come have your life turned upside down, make new friends, have this other experience, and then be sort of under a microscope at Iowa and the athletics and the, the cameras and the reporters and all that, and the pressure to perform at a really high level every week.
And they're not having their family support system there a lot of the times. Some were fortunate, but it was difficult for a lot of guys to have their family there for most games. So I thought it was really cool hearing about the kickoff classic. To me, it was just some strange preseason game. I thought that was cool, but for some of the guys on the team, that was like the best game of their whole experience, because they got to go back home and kind of show off and say, this is, what I've made myself into. I left the state, I left this area, but I've done well for myself, and kind of showcase it. So it was really a proud moment for them to go back to that area of the country, and maybe have family and friends come watch them for the first time. So same with when we went to the bowl games in Texas, and having guys say, more of my family could make it to games. Like, we just got spoiled, I guess, growing up here, where a lot of our family could make it because we're from here. So that was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, definitely. You heard Dayton Hughes talk about how emotional he was for that game and how excited and pumped up, and like what he had to prove and to showcase. Yeah, I was super fortunate. My parents made every single game I ever played in, and it's one of those small things, I think, that you don't realize till later how big of an impact, right? It's like it was a huge feat for them to do, but for me it didn't. I don't think it resonated as much until some of these stories kind of came out. I was super fortunate and super happy that they were there, but I think really that support was a lot of that. I guess you hear that with some of the other athletes, like, with the Michael Jordans and those types, that when they lose their father, that support system that's kind of taken away from them. So I think that's a huge part of sports, right? Is having people that are there to push you and to be that kind of safety net for you to fall back on. Obviously, you're going to run into adversity and trials and tribulations and stuff like that.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, same thing. My parents were supportive, I think, almost every game too. And it's strange to imagine a situation where I didn't see someone in the stands or after the game that I could go talk to. That would have been unusual, right? And so you just had that already in there as a support system. And so it's just more admiration, I guess, for the guys that went through that and could get themselves to a high level of excellence, and maybe aren't able to, to chat with their family after the game and kind of celebrate like that. Or get picked up when they're down, right? They have to kind of do that themselves or band together with other guys on the team. So it's just really impressive to hear.
For sure. And then you also, yeah, it really bummed me out when, I think somebody said they parents saw him at 3 games, right? Or 2 games, or, even this is the only time my parents saw me play, or parents saw them play. I think also one of the great things was the parent community that we had. So they sort of were able to fill that gap some, not quite as the original parents, but I think that was, a part where that people that did make that trip were like a fill-in of sorts for that. So I think that's what's kind of been really eye-opening, is just the amount of support staff and support that these players need in the program in general, right? You think the layers of, like, you have the obvious coaches, head coaches, trainers, and some of those pieces, but you're kind of like, it pushes to students, friends, people in the community, people that, that are just like surround, it just has to like surround these guys. And you don't really see that piece until you start talking about these guys and who kind of kept them engaged when they really were struggling in that.
Yeah, I think as we get more into some of the support staff, I think that's going to become more evident, kind of like quiet behind the scenes, keeping everyone going, helping the team succeed. But they're not going to get accolades, and they're not going to get accolades, and they're not going to get the kudos they deserve. So hopefully, as we bring on some more of those people into the podcast, I think that will be a chance for us to help other people realize how important they were.
We'd go to bowl games and you'd see that plane would be half full of administration and staff too. And now you maybe understand that piece of, oh yeah, these people are a huge part of the success. Oh, guess who's here? Guess who's here?
Who's
Brion!
there?
Brion.
Millie. There she is.
Oh,
the
there
real
she goes.
star of the show.
Is
Hi,
that your
Millie.
buddy?
Hi.
You wanted to call him this weekend, didn't you?
Yeah. You can
You
call
want
me
to talk to Brian?
anytime.
Yeah,
Wait, what do you want to tell Brian?
you saw Brian?
What do you want to say? You want to say hi?
Hi, Millie.
You want to say come visit? All right, you want to say night night to daddy? All right, give daddy kisses.
Have a kiss?
Can you give daddy a kiss?
What do you want to say? You want to say listen to Daddy's podcast? You want to sing
You want to sing your ABCs?
ABCs? Go A, B, C, D. You go ahead.
To daddy.
C, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. You want your passy? Okay. You want to say listen to Daddy's podcast? See right here, talking to you.
Listen.
To Daddy's podcast.
No?
Nope.
All right.
Okay.
Night night.
All right, love.
All right, give daddy a hug. Night night.
Let's say goodbye to Brian.
Bye. Bye, Millie.
Listen.
I'll see you soon.
Slow down, daddy.
Okay.
You want to fold him?
Slow down.
Fold him down.
Come on, Mel.
Okay, love. I love you so much. Get some rest, okay?
Yeah.
Night, night, honey. I love you. See you tomorrow. Sorry about that. As per usual.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could talk about that too, as Millie makes an appearance on every podcast, gets to meet the guest.
Then we cut out.
It's usually logistically around her bedtime when we can jump on a call with guys. So usually sometimes 10 Eastern, 7
7.
Pacific. We're on
We hope
opposite
it's
ends of the
7.
coast. So that's our logistics of when we record episodes. Yeah, mostly it's been at night, right? A couple times in the afternoon, but for the most part, it's pretty late.
Yeah,
my
most
time.
evenings. Yeah, some of these have gone pretty late in the evening at your place, at least. Yeah, it's usually about 7. We hope to get her in bed at 7, but who knows? She's been pushing later.
So we could do a whole podcast of her appearances, but we don't usually cut that out of the podcast, but that does happen on all the recordings, so it's cool.
Definitely, yeah, it's great to see her. She gets all excited and smiles, looks at herself on the camera.
Just
I
getting
need
used
to see
this
Brian.
technology.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Brian, I want to see Brian. Snacks, we got snacks too, but snacks isn't in here.
I'll add that I think you and I have had so many more conversations in the last year than any year prior. Even when we probably roomed together, probably had more conversations this last year than that. So I think that's been an awesome bonus for this. Is I feel like we've gotten closer and had even an improved friendship. So yeah, if no one listens to this, I think it's been fun just to have a project we do together and continue the friendship. And yeah, that's been cool.
Definitely, and to reconnect to all the other guys too, right? We
Yeah, absolutely.
haven't at least to see them and talk to them. It's been a long time unless we run into them at games, and running into Mike Daly at the Music City Bowl, right? He was a big part of me being a freshman and the support system that I had then, and to see his son playing, and that was exciting to be kind of part of that and be able to watch those guys perform and stuff. Now, yeah, it was cool for that for sure.
Yeah, and there's some great guys. Like they could have made it harder for like freshmen and young guys, but they didn't really try to intimidate younger guys. They're just like, hey, if you can help us play, we need help, right? And so I think that made it so much easier that they were cool and they just want to play football, do well, but they're just great people. Yeah. I mean, I think back and guys that just do whatever, right? They're a senior, 5th-year senior, and you're this freshman, redshirt freshman, and they were there to help. So that was always cool.
For sure. And then you also get into the piece of where everyone's from, right? You're talking about Trevor being from Guyana or Guyana. Yeah, Guyana, or how do you say that?
Yeah, I didn't know
And,
that. I knew he was from Canada, but I didn't know he wasn't even born in Canada.
Texas, New Jersey, all those different places that, all kind of came together into one crazy melting pot, which is wild. Funny mix of personalities and all that too, for sure.
We talked about some guys we expected going into the interview, like they're going to be talkative. We're going to have to try and keep them moving along onto different topics. And then other guys, we thought maybe they'll be shy. We'll have to probably prompt them with a lot of questions and have follow-up questions. But for the most part, people have been able to just kind of riff and go. And guys that I thought would be more shy were really talkative and outgoing. And so I think that was kind of a surprise that maybe as we get older, we get more comfortable and we have professional jobs and we have to get good at speaking and talking to lots of people. So we're not shy college kids anymore, or I don't know. I think that's been kind of interesting.
Most of us. I haven't had to do a lot of public speaking. So some of this is a little terrifying. You're getting in front of people and being like, oh shit, what are we gonna ask him next? There's been a couple moments where I'm like, oh God, I hope Brian clicks in here because I'm dead in the water. I don't have anything.
Yeah, I just
I'm
like I'm
gonna go
stumped
off
for a
with
second. Yeah. And
just
usually I've had the same thing. I hope Nick has a question because I'm drawing a blank right now.
yeah, you just like your mind just goes and I'm like, oh man, I cannot think of anything to ask right now.
So on
Uh,
that lines, I've done enough like watching of myself because of my job that I know how my voice sounds and I know how I look on camera. It's not something I'm still totally comfortable with, but I'm used to it at least. But how is that for you to have to hear your voice? I don't know if you've done that a lot before, or the people I've talked to, I've had them watch themselves teach a class or something. It's not a great experience for them because they're kind of like, what? Is that what I sound like? That doesn't sound like me. I don't know if you had any feedback on just you going through and editing yourself in these podcasts.
it's interesting because thinking back to when you and I went to school, you were a super introverted person, really
Yes.
shy, didn't talk to many people.
Nope.
I was sort of an introverted person. I wasn't like, super outgoing person. So first part is just seeing you from where you used to be as a college kid to what you are now to be presenting in front of groups and that thing. That's an amazing thing for me to watch. For
I
me
think my
personally,
parents said the same thing. They're like, you teach in front of classes to people in public? All right. And you get paid for this? People are paying you to do this, you? So yeah, I think that shocked more than just people on the team. I think my family was surprised too.
yeah, I was like, I should start this podcast with Brian. And then I got it started. And I was like, wait, he doesn't really say much. I'm like, this is a bad idea. Like, we're both going to be just sitting here like, okay, yeah. So
Yeah.
how's it going? It's gonna be like Beavis and Butthead sitting on the couch. It's like, oh, pretty good, pretty good. It's like,
Yeah.
funny. So for me personally, there's many reasons that we started this. One of them was to get comfortable in this position of being like in the spotlight, having to communicate and do these different things. I think, yeah, at first, if you'd asked me, I would have done this 5 years ago. I would have been like, hell no, this is nothing I'd ever would have thought of doing. So I think I haven't been put in these positions throughout my professional career to speak in front of crowds and that. If you're in a group and they go around the room and like, someone, say something about yourself. So I just, I'm a sweat. My stomach hurts. I even just the simplest. Hi, I'm Nick Gallery. I do this. Blah 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 blah. Terrified, completely terrified. So I kind of got to the point where I was even recently. I just was like, I'm gonna throw myself into the fire. I'm like, I'm gonna make this really weird, really awkward. I'm just gonna try to be myself and do that. So I've done better than I thought I would. I think some of the parts of this I've just tried to put myself in uncomfortable positions, I think. I don't know if that's the right
Okay.
life advice to give people, but I think it's getting more used to hearing my voice, getting better at kind of speaking, and then even just certain things like you look at these different speakers and what they do with their hands and where they look and how they talk and the filler words and those things. So I think that's the part of just recognizing how I communicate. And I guess I wish I really would have had that opportunity as a young kid to get this training to go in front of a camera and say, be really great at doing that. I think my younger brother, Robert, I remember distinctly when he was at the draft, he was picked right after Eli Manning. So Eli Manning got up to the podium and he's a, top pick. He probably led college in statistics and all that, right? Was a big deal. And he got up there and he kind of ummed and ahhed and he was like slumped over and he just, didn't perform as well as I thought he would under a microphone. And then Robert gets up, and I'm sure his stature and some of those things help, but he was this big commanding presence and he spoke well and he was really, eloquent and just night and day difference. And I was really surprised that like, wow, he's night and day ahead of him who should have this dialed, right? He's going to be in the spotlight for the rest of his life if things go well.
The
Yeah,
son of an
quarterback.
NFL quarterback, right? Yeah.
Yeah, probably, probably one of the top in the league, commercials and all this media stuff and speeches and, engagements and all this stuff, where Robert probably was going to slip a little bit into, obscurity unless, something crazy happened. So yeah, that was a kind of a light bulb moment at some point for me to see those things and really kind of be amazed that there's not more of that when we started the process. And I think that would be something, if I could tell, young kids, is like, learn how to do this, learn how to get in front of a camera, learn how to talk and be comfortable doing this. And, it's going to suck for a while and you just got to get better at it. I think it's the same like anything else. And so, yeah, it's been interesting. Sometimes I look and I see like, those things and see that 2,000 times. And it's like, oh, wow, I need to really think about what I'm saying and how I'm saying it. And when I pause and those things, I think it's been great that way. I'm hopefully getting more comfortable in this position and, putting myself in these spots to get better at it. And I don't know if you notice some of the intros, like I'll start and I'll nail the first half and then all of a sudden it's just like, whoa, off the cliff. It's like steering to get it back on the road to some degree. So I think the people that are amazing at this, like, it's a skill, right? It's a real skill of being able to do that, to think about and to react and to ask interesting questions. And so I think that's always kind of been who I was to some degree, is I didn't like talking as much. So I would ask a lot of questions to get other people to talk. So I would just try to pull strings to get stuff out of them. So I guess
That's a good introversion trick we use.
And half the time when I start telling stories, I don't know if I'm a good enough storyteller that people, they'll ask me like 5 questions in a row afterwards. And I'm like, wait, I'm still getting into this story. I've enjoyed digging into that part of the storytelling and some of the presentation pieces and being a little more comfortable doing this, because it is a skill. And especially at this stage of our life, we should be good at this, right? We should be able to get up in front of a room and do that. I think that's been part of it. So you listen to these things when you edit them. For a while, it was taking us 10 hours to edit. So I'd hear the same stuff over and over. It got me to a point where I just started writing better because I was listening and editing so many of these that it was like, okay, sentence structure and how you put together, just how sentences flow and how stories flow and all that stuff. So that's been an interesting side of thinking about it as a story form of the 3 parts of the story, like they have in movies and stuff like that, or whatever that kind of structure is.
Yeah, and you've shared a lot of different podcasts you stumble upon, or storytelling and public speaking and things like that, just to help us both like pick up some tips and better understand like what we should be looking for and how we want to think about this, and can we help our guests pull out the details of the story that is important and interesting without skipping over key areas or cool tidbits that might be interesting for the audience. It's definitely a skill. I think it'll be interesting to look at our early podcasts and then look at the more recent ones, and hopefully it looks a lot better.
Yeah, that progression I think is going to be wild to look at. Yeah, you'll look back and be like, wow, that was an interesting start. And then we've grown a lot from there. I think we've gotten a lot of good stories. I guess part of the piece is, are they funny just for us and our friends, or is it for people at large? But also people have shared stuff with us. I think that's another skill, is getting people that are willing to kind of be vulnerable and let you into some degree, right? I guess we're not trying to expose anyone or do those things, but it's hard for people to do that, or to get into a comfort zone. I guess we've known a lot of these guys too, which helps. They're doing the same thing we are. We're like, oh, how did I sound? What's my voice sound like? How did I look on camera? Did I sound? Was this good? Did I talk too long? It's like all those pieces of trying to get better, like we've tried to do I think our entire lives, of this, constant, how do I do that a little bit better every time?
Yeah, in a different setting instead of sports, it's in a personal life and other skills that we need to practice and get better at.
To some extent, I didn't really get intellectually curious. I left school, which was kind of a waste, I guess, to a certain degree, but I just wasn't at that point in my life, I don't think, to really dig into the educational piece and the curiosity bit more, where now I'd be like, oh, maybe I should go back to school now, and it'd be just much more impactful in that piece. But I guess too, the internet and some of these other things allow you just so many avenues to look into stuff and to go deep in these pieces and educate you that ways.
Oh, I find myself every day saying, I think I learned this in grade school in science class, but I never was that curious at the time. It was kind of like, all right, that's cool how the moon works. And then you have experiences and you go out and you're like, that moon keeps coming up the same time each month at the on the full moon. Is that always going to happen or is this? And so yeah, then you go down this rabbit hole of like, I'm sure I learned this when I was 10 years old, but it never stuck because I didn't have anything to base it on. But now it's like you have life experiences, you see problems, you try to understand what is going on here, what's this current events topic that's happening. Maybe it directly impacts me now or partly impacts me. And so I think, yeah, just as we get older, we start to get more curious about these kind of things. And maybe that's the point, right? Is enough to know the basics so that later as you need the details, you have a foundation there. And we're not meant to memorize everything we've ever learned, but teach us how to learn. But you're right, I didn't really dive deep. It was just like get your homework done, try to get the assignment turned in, don't fail the class, or just make sure you get a decent grade. And then you got to get to football practice. That's the main focus, right?
Do you think you would have went to college otherwise if you hadn't played sports?
Yeah, I had pretty set in my mind, or at least was parented that way that, a college education opens up opportunities. Maybe you have to look at other jobs that are potentially more manual labor jobs if you don't have a college degree or that don't pay as well. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And even when I graduated, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do, but I knew that just getting that degree was important in something. And as I've grown up, I realized a lot of people don't even use that degree, but it got them a foot in the door, or that degree showed that you can stick with this education program for 4 years with life's distractions. And you probably learned a lot of different topics and learned how to study. And is it completely applicable? Do you need a college degree? I don't know, but there are some advantages, I think, that it shows employers. But you can learn a lot of that on the job too, to be able to do a job well. So it's not mandatory, but it just says that, hey, I took my time and I got through and I accomplished something to the completion.
Yeah, and your mom was a PE teacher or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
So they had me when they were 21. So both were working and then went back and got their degrees later. So my dad in the mid 80s, I think my mom in the late 80s. So they kind of took turns going back to get schooling. So I think that might also be it, that they were older when they got their degrees and they probably appreciated it more. I remember dropping my dad off somewhere on campus and we pick him up for night school because he was getting, I think, his criminology degree. And so you're just like, oh, that's what you do. You grow up and you go to college and you get your degree. That was the driver for football. Was this is the sport I think I could maybe get a scholarship in to pay for it, because I don't really want to pay for it myself, but I'll walk on and go to the local college because that was one of the lower cost tuitions you could get. And then hopefully I get a scholarship at some point and can cover the expenses so I don't leave school with a big college student bill.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting pieces now of, I think they say college appreciates like 12, or inflation is like 12% a year, 8% a year for college. And
It's
at some
crazy
point,
now.
those numbers don't even make sense, right? You're a young kid and you come
It
out
doesn't.
hundreds of $1,000s in debt and not able to pay that back with any foreseeable future. So
I feel like it was $4,000 or $5,000 for the whole year for tuition and books and stuff at Iowa in the 90s, early 90s.
yeah, I
That
think it was
seems
maybe that, or
pretty
maybe it was for a
affordable.
semester. Yeah. Wasn't it like four,
Was
eight,
it
eight
something?
thousand total a year? It was like for a semester, maybe, I think.
Okay, something like that. Now I don't know what it is, 20, 30 grand. Even with inflation, it seems just almost unaffordable.
Interesting to see how that will be 10 years from now or 20 years from now or when my kid is growing up, pay $1 million for college.
And the sports part, right? Like, is college athletics, especially like college football, is that really part of the university anymore? Like, this is a professional sports team, basically. So, does it even belong on college campus? I think that's a debate that we're going to have over the next 5, 10 years. And I don't know if that's going to stick around, at least with the money that's coming in and all this stuff. I don't know if it can really become a student athlete. We're not here to make money, but there's tens of millions of dollars coming in every year. And then all the other sports are kind of acting more like traditional programs that kind of just squeak by, or it's investment by the school.
So go deeper into that then.
I think college football is just a whole nother animal compared to all these other sports. Behind it is basketball, and then there's a huge drop off with all the other sports. And I don't think that was always the case. Probably when Hayden came on board in the late 70s, it was still, small budget. But with the rise of football popularity and college football specifically, like it's just so big now and so much money and so much like attention on it. I don't know how you can fit everything else into that same bucket. I always think it's like, is it going the model of like your European soccer leagues where you have these levels and the Big Ten's in the top tier Premier League, and you've got these different levels of Division One, but they're not in the same level of spending, but they could work their way up to that. And then you got your Division One AA, and you've got your Division Three, and all these other schools that want to have programs, and maybe they can bounce up and down, but it's almost separate. It's more like a city league or a county or something that supports them. So I can almost see it going that direction, just because with all the money and the potential at the top tiers to get there. But your Boise States could be that team that's creeping up, trying to get into the Premier League and trying to raise enough money to and have enough success to get voted up into that league. And I don't know all the dynamics of that, but just the basics that I know, it feels like it might be going to that model.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I think it feels like these sports programs are just part of the marketing arm of the college too, to some degree, right? It's advertising basically at the basis, right? The school gets out there, the name gets out there. People want to be associated with the winning in that part and the sports aspect. But I think it's ultimately the school is the one that reaps the benefit too of, hey, we just got our name plastered all over the place. Ohio State just got a bunch of unpaid media advertising winning the national championship, right? It definitely helps the school. It'd be interesting to do a study to see what that impact is of what that does to people saying, hey, I want to go be a part of this school from the football or basketball or whatever that is, right? People get attached to sports in those ways.
I don't know what the number is, but there's definitely an impact. I recall hearing numbers that it boosts your enrollment the next year for sure. When your team has a successful program that is unexpected, like in Alabama might not get a bump when they win a national championship when they won so many, but I guarantee you Indiana and Boise State and Arizona State will get a bump in enrollment next year. I can almost guarantee that. That does have something to do with the school. The school does need that program. It is an outlet for students. It's a pride thing. Like it's part of the school, but so yeah, it would be hard to take that away with all that tradition of 100+ years of football, these schools. But it's a different model that's going down, and I don't know how they can really say this is part of the academic program when it's just so different.
Yeah, the amateur versus the professional part of it. Like, what do you think if you would have been in that position as a kid back then? If someone said, listen, Brian, we're going to give you 50 grand to play if you're a starter, or 25 grand, or some sizable amount of money for you at that point, which, at that point probably would have been like $300, but
it's like $50 a month. Yeah.
Yeah. So you'd have been like a 100 air at least, or 1,000 air. Do you think school would have even been on your radar? Do you think you would have been? I mean, I guess I was really focused on playing. I was invested in school enough to get by, but I also wasn't inspired to go to school, and I wasn't into something where I thought I was really like into and wanted to learn more.
Yeah.
So I think, it was a football thing first. And then after that, I always thought I could come back and do it again if I needed, if I figured it out later. I had this opportunity to go and do something special. And I was like, why am I focusing on something that I can do another time? I think it felt like the window was like this big, and, I had this much of time to pull off the rest of it.
I think that was the same way. I mean, that there's time to go back for school anytime, and you have a window for athletics and an opportunity that may come up that you can't just guarantee, right? So you have to take advantage of that. So yeah, if someone said we have this professional football league that happens after high school that you can go to, or you can quit playing football or play like at a Division III school type of setup, you don't really get a scholarship. You just kind of have some extracurricular activity. I would take advantage of the professional league, even if it was, something low cost. I mean, after Iowa, I tried to make it in the NFL and then played some arena football and some odd jobs here and there. So I was going to try to ride it out as long as I could, but I always wanted to make sure I had a backup plan. So when that time was up or I was feeling like that wasn't worth it anymore, then I had something I could fall back on. So, but yeah, I think I would have, yeah, taken that opportunity, no doubt.
Taking the opportunity to get paid more, you're saying? What do you mean?
Just, yeah, make money and instead of go to school on a scholarship. I think I would have taken that opportunity to go get paid somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's the piece that is the big motivator, which is interesting because, yeah, if you would have said I could make millions of dollars doing something and it's not school, I think it would have jumped at the chance, right? It's almost a no-brainer to some degree, or maybe it's not a no-brainer, but it's a high motivator in the whole part of it, I guess. And I think that's the other piece is that limited amount of time to kind of capitalize on that momentum. So yeah, I think I would have probably, yeah, all in, or even I guess at some point there's this scale of if you're playing like a semi-pro or one of those deals, like there's got to be a risk reward for it. I think to a certain degree, I would have gone like, okay, if I'm making this amount of money, it probably makes sense. Or if I'm, and just do like an economics piece, an economics kind of review of it to see if it's worth it. And I guess depending on the time commitment and some of those other pieces too, right? Of
Right.
what is the input for the output kind of thing. And so, yeah, I'm sure if it was a decent salary where I could make that, working a regular job, and it's like, oh, this is a lot more fun and a lot, different and interesting in that thing.
Yeah, and you throw on the prestige if it was similar to Iowa, not like you're playing in front of an empty stadium, but if you go and you've got sold out stadium and it's got the same allure and the same attention that Iowa football gets in the state of Iowa or Iowa City area, like it seems like a no-brainer to pursue something like that. And, I don't think, some people maybe had money, but I didn't have money. I worked in the summer and made money, and you try to stretch that out throughout the year. It's not fun to not have money or just trying to make sure you can pay your bills every month. But it's a good learning experience and it makes you good at doing that. But it sure be nice if you didn't have to. And so if I got to the point where it's like, hey, I could just get a car, didn't have to worry about it breaking down. I didn't have to like wait till, oh, I'm gonna get some money next week. I'm gonna try to stretch out this gallon of gas. Hopefully don't run out of gas before the weekend's up, or I'm gonna slide this bill a little bit later next month, like playing that game. It's good to learn that, but also gets tiring after a while. So when I got my first job, I was like, wow, this is awesome. I'm not even gonna have to check my bank account to see if, I'm gonna overdraft it. It's a nice feeling. So
But you still had to go to the ATM, right? You didn't have your phone to check it.
that's right.
You're like, let me grab my. Oh, wait, hold on. I gotta go to an ATM.
All right.
Remember that 4-digit code that I put in 6 years ago?
For sure. Yeah. And just kind of crossing your fingers, like, I hope there's more in there than I think there is. Can I get out $20? Yeah, so I can get in and get a beer somewhere and maybe something to eat after at Hardee's or get a piece of pizza somewhere.
I feel like a lot of our team was in the same boat, right? I feel like there's some kids that came from some sort of means, but the majority of them felt like
I'd say most of them are kind of the same boat. They're living off that per diem we get each month. And it wasn't much. I think it was like, yeah, we said $400 maybe. And that had to cover your room and utilities and any other incidentals. So didn't leave much left over.
It's also kind of wild that they don't teach financial classes in college and or high school, right? It's great to see our teammate Chris Jackson doing some of that stuff, which, I've always thought for years that was just a miss, that we're not making that happen to where kids know about insurance or mortgages or just basic finance and how to save and do those different things. So I think that's another great part of an opportunity for kids coming in to say, yeah, okay, now I have some money. What am I going to do with it? What am I going to go out and buy a car? I guess to some degree, you see some of these kids with these Maybachs and all that, which I guess is great. You can do what you want with your own money, but it's still kind of a miss of, wow, you have generational wealth that you don't even realize and you don't know how to deal with it. That's one thing that kind of is frightening with being 20 some years old. I don't think people know how to deal with that amount of wealth that's kind of dropped on in their lap, or not dropped in their lap, but they earned it. But
Oh, yeah.
have that experience to have that kind of uptick,
Sudden too, yeah.
sudden uptick of economics, and then just what do I do with this, and how do you handle it, and how do you have the right support staff on that? So I think that's one of the things I'm concerned about kids having, that's without sounding like an old man, of, well, okay, I saw 20 some 30 some year old guys that couldn't handle this. How are you going to be able to handle it as an 18-year-old with a lot more pressure, a lot different maturity level, and just, life come at you really quickly, really young. You see these actors and that piece when they're kid actors, right? Same thing. It's just, you're not prepared for it. There's no way to get like ready for that.
Yeah. I think my wife and I were having that conversation too about like, what are the skills like we really should have learned? And I think it's assumed that your parents are teaching you all those skills, but they may not know either, right? And so how are they going to teach you if they're still trying to figure it out because their parents didn't know, or they didn't go through any classes on this stuff, whether it's financial literacy or how to buy a house, or just like I think I made a list of 50 different things, like topics that we should have learned before we got money, or so we could kind of accelerate our maturity to become an adult and know what we are getting into. Just like how to manage a credit card, how do credit cards work, right? First mail we got was like offers for credit cards, right? That was the first thing in the dorms, like in your mailbox was advertisements. You're like, oh, $5,000, I could get a credit card. I'm a pre-approved, right? And then I'm gonna roll that bill up, and then wait, what's this monthly bill? I can't afford it. Like, if you don't know better, you can get caught into that very easily. And there's nothing to say, this is how credit cards work, and this is what it does, and this is your credit score, and nothing like that. So how many people are taken advantage of for that, just not knowing, or unclear about how that stuff works? And where were they getting that taught? I don't know. I don't think that was a class in high school you took. So you're reliant on your parents maybe to teach you all this stuff, but maybe they never had a credit card. I don't know. And you mentioned public speaking, right? Maybe we had one or two classes, or one or two times you'd have to speak in front of your class in high school, maybe in college. There was a little bit of speech, but not like to the level of like becoming really good at it.
Yeah, it almost makes me think, like, if I was a coach, I would think about having my players teach like the lessons every week. I would say, if you're able to teach this, you got to know it well enough to be able to spit it back out to someone else. Standing up in front of someone, making sure you're engaging, getting your points across, like being succinct and all those things. I think that would have been an interesting thought of, okay, hey, Brian, this week you're taking over for this game plan and you're going to lead us through this. And I think it would have been terrible at the time, but also super helpful, right? Super helpful to be like, all right, I'm engaged in this, and do those things. That's one of the thoughts I'd had. Maybe put that on your list.
We've heard a couple guys talk about that. I didn't know like coaching was an option or how to do that, right? Maybe I would have gotten interested in that. Maybe there's a pathway, and now we know that it's like you go on as a graduate assistant, and then, or you volunteer coach or something, or you go down to high school level, but there is a pathway through coaching. But was that ever presented, or do people talk to say, is this something you're interested in, or can we give you opportunities now as a player to act like a coach? You want to sit in film session? You want to help prepare a game plan? Do you want to do something else in addition to your role in the team, take on more responsibility? And maybe some of the more older guys do that, but I think there's some guys that mentioned like they maybe looking back would have pursued coaching, but didn't really know what to do or how to go about it, and maybe didn't reach out and ask their coaches directly. So, but maybe if they'd been approached and said, hey, I think you've got the right mentality for it, I would have said I'm too quiet. I wouldn't be a very good coach. My perception of a coach is like, someone outgoing and loud and commands the room and carries a large voice, and that's not how all coaches are. And so I would have ruled myself out. But maybe if someone says, there's lots of ways to be a good coach, and you don't have to look like this person or this person, maybe that was something I would have gone down that path. But you don't really know that those are options or what to look for. So maybe the people that are really into it reach out and seek advice, but I think that's a natural progression for a lot of guys, but I don't know if they know how to get there other than maybe at some point they know they want to get into coaching.
So you just described John Austin, basically. Coach Austin?
You're right. I was trying to think
You're
of
a
a
little
coach
skinny.
from
You're a
coming to
little
mind. I was
skinny, but
thinking like Dan
loud,
McCarney,
boisterous,
but John Austin
screaming,
would fit that exactly. Yeah.
curse words, the whole 9 yards. Yeah. Today, I'd like to highlight the Damani Gibson Foundation, focusing on raising awareness of heart health. It also provides leadership and empowerment service for youth and their families. The foundation works with student ambassadors to spark important conversations about emergency preparedness, all with the goal of educating athletes in the community about sudden cardiac arrest. We are honored to feature the Damani Gibson Foundation as they work to ensure athletes and bystanders are prepared to save lives where and when it matters most. To find out more information, find them at damanigibsonfoundation.org. That's DAMANIGIBSON foundation.org. I knew it existed. I think I sort of knew the path, but I don't know if I wanted to pay the toll. I think I was focused on a family, which took me 25 years to figure out, but I didn't want to see my kids and my wife as little as those guys did. So I think that was the main driver for that. Looking back now, the opportunity was huge. I think if you got in and did the right work, right? I didn't see that part of like, wow, you could be like Brett Bielema, right? You could have your own program and you could be rebuilding someplace and leave your own legacy in that.
The money wasn't there at the time either. I think Coach Fry, I saw he retired at making 400,000 salary plus whatever commercials and stuff he had, but that's a good number. But you also see how many years it took him to get to that level of coaching, decades. And so you're like, okay, that sounds about right. Now, when you see that assistant coaches making over $1 million, right? Then you see like, wow, that's a pretty lucrative job. You're a professional. It's almost like as good as a professional athlete without the wear and tear, right? Because we were looking at the NFL first rookie contract, it was like 150 or something, or 175.
125, yeah, sure.
Yeah, that was if you made it as a rookie. And it's like that was huge money back then, but now it's like you're a starting assistant coach, you're going to make that. Pretty crazy how those salaries have gone up. So not that you're going to do that for the money, you better enjoy the coaching and working with kids, but it looks at the career path versus you do it for the love and you make enough to get by and you don't see your family. That was kind of the way it looked from the outside. And you're going to be at the office a lot and you're going to be watching a lot of film. And if you don't like that, then you're not going to last because it's not going to pay that well and you're going to be gone a lot.
Yeah, and I guess, if you're working that much, you don't have time to spend it either. So you could like sock it away. You get your clothes, your shoes, probably get your meals. Like you could.
There was a lot of other perks that they got that we didn't know about. Their cars probably were covered.
Yeah, cruises.
Yeah,
they get a cruise.
They got
every year.
some cruise. They got some extra perks for sure. All that sweet gear. Yeah, it didn't look lucrative at the time, but maybe that's good. Maybe that's what you want is someone who wants to do it because just for the love of it.
But there was a little bit of prestige to it, though. Maybe that was more focused on Coach Fry, but you were still around it, right? You were in proximity with it. People gave you a certain status to that. I would assume not that matters, but.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure that looked good on their resume when they were done and they said they played or they coach under Coach Fry.
We were probably a little biased too, right? If you start going down on that ladder that you mentioned earlier, I'm sure those numbers disappear quickly too, right? It's probably there's a gradient of if you're at a smaller market school, then you're not, just the economics aren't there, right? If there's not 60,000 people filling the stands every week, buying jerseys and that stuff.
Yeah, and
Probably
you look at the guys coaching in high school, I mean, they're getting paid little to nothing with maybe the hope that they're going to someday get an opportunity. You got to love it, and that's got to be your driver there. It's just kind of interesting to kind of look back how that's changed with the whole coaching and how that's become very lucrative, and I don't think it was at the time.
And still the downsides, right? You lose 3 seasons and then you're packing up your bags and going someplace else, or you're not
Yeah,
performing as
seemed
a
very mobile, very unstable,
coordinator.
and hard work. I mean, yeah, I think that was one thing we always took away is our coaches worked their ass off. And it doesn't always turn into results, and they're relying on idiots like us to perform. And you feel like you're letting them down. Like, I'm going to get my coach fired, and I'm trying my best, and he's trying his best to motivate me and get me to perform, and I'm not doing it. I'm letting my family, the fans, myself, and my coach down. It's a lot of pressure.
That went through your mind of getting the coach fired?
Well, yeah, I mean, they changed coaches halfway through, and we went through a lot of kicking positions. So
Yeah.
whether I was partly responsible or not, I don't know. I'm sure I wasn't helping too much when they have to rotate through a couple different guys to find someone to fill the void there. So yeah, I think take responsibility where you think there's some, blame there. And you can see that happening, right? When you're struggling, you're like, they're really getting on our position coach a lot. Yeah, I don't know if it's correlated or not. It could be related to something else, but
That's interesting. Maybe it's my ego was probably too big. I didn't even worry about it.
oh, you're
I was
you
like,
weren't
yeah,
you
he's
weren't having
fine.
a
No, they
problem.
just changed. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, who's the next guy up?
Yeah, you weren't the problem, but I felt that it wasn't like we were just out competing each other and we were doing well, but we went through a lot of different kickers. So
Yeah.
And then 2 years in, they changed the position coach who was overseeing the kickers.
Never really thought of it in those terms, but interesting. It's funny how this podcast has brought up those different pieces of that I was like, oh, I never thought of it in that way.
That was Coach Triplett. So I think we'll be able to get him on at some point and see what he thinks. If
What if he
what
just goes
happened,
after you? He's like,
might.
Hurley, it was your fault. You were the one that did this to me.
That's
You
right.
made me go into fundraising. I hated it. He's like got your name on the wall. It's like,
Yeah.
he's like crossing off the names. He's just,
It's like Finkel.
Yeah, Ray Finkel.
Ray Finkel.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's extra pressure. I've talked to him. He's worried more about if he affected us in some negative way, but it's like, no,
Yeah.
that's absolutely not it. But yeah, you can see the pressure that was mounting from Coach Fry down to your position coach that he filtered out that came to you, and he was trying to figure out the right way to talk to my players to get the best out of them. And I'm going to have to filter out what Coach Fry said to me in a way to get that out of them. If I give them exactly what Coach Fry said, I think it may negatively backfire. So I always respected and appreciated the way they would manage that relationship. And they tried their best, especially our specialists. Like, we have a lot more of the mental side we have to be in tune with. So you can't just scream and yell and say, get out there and tackle somebody, right? Maybe for you that might have worked, but I wouldn't
What are you
respond
trying to say? What are you trying to say, Hurl?
Well, you have more of that football mentality. I was made to be more of a kicker, and on the mental side of it, I wasn't going to play on the field.
It's
So I had to be a
interesting.
specialist.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that. It probably depends on what motivates you too, right? A good coach really treats each of his players differently.
Yes.
You got to find what gets that person going. And I think for me, at least in high school, my coach, he was a screamer and like he was just like hard-nosed and go out there and do it kind of thing. And I think that I responded to that well.
Mhm.
And I also had a track coach that I think was more laid back and less rah-rah and that. So I think I responded maybe to that as well. And maybe it was more self-motivating in that part. Maybe it's like what you grew up with as well. I think, Coach Fry coming and screaming at me, I would have been like, oh man, light bulb, get to work, or, do something different. And maybe that's where I struggled between the full effort of, oh, I can put the effort and I can focus and I can go hard, compared to the, I need to be cerebral and measured and the different pieces of trying to be a specialist. And that's probably maybe when all that came together, I was like, oh, wow, that was amazing. And then when it did, it was like, okay, that was a pretty terrible thing. I guess that part didn't faze me. I was used to kind of that as a method of getting communicated with. Just you did something wrong. It was coming, and you just were like, all right, I'm gonna curse a little bit and kick a bench and whatever else you're gonna do, and then get up and do it again.
Yeah, and I think that most of the coaches I had didn't try to scream and yell. I think they either realized or I responded without that.
Yeah.
And so they knew, like, I don't have to with Brion,
Yeah.
but A couple times they did. They get on me, and I don't know if I got a different response or not. So maybe they would experiment a little bit and see what if I, get on them and scream at them and threaten them a little bit, see what happens. They're trying to figure it out, right? And they're trying to get the best out of us and don't know how everyone responds. So you kind of have to experiment and see how that works. But I think they'd prefer not to have to, unless that's in their nature, right? But yeah, you're right. I think the best ones have to come up with almost a custom way of motivating each player and know how they respond best.
I don't think I needed that. I think it just was gas to the fire. If it was helpful in a negative way, if that's positive in a negative way, is that possible? But I think it's
the,
also,
Bobby Knight approach. I think that's how he got results. I don't think that's the best way to get results, or I think it's limiting because if you're afraid of failure, then you perform differently than if you're trying to excel. I think it's a different mindset, but you don't make mistakes in that type of environment where you're going to get yelled at or screamed at for screwing up. So it can get you to a certain point, but I think it can limit you as well. So I think they're different approaches, and you see it across all the coaches, right? They all have different styles, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the teams and the
yeah.
personnel, but they all can be effective, but it's just kind of your philosophy, I guess, and what you're trying to accomplish.
I guess it probably depends on your level of success as well, maybe too. Because I think when I was at the Jets, Parcells was that type, right? Just to get after you and scream at people. And, Bill Belichick was there, same kind of, mentality. And I don't think I was doing that well. So it just compiled to a certain degree. So I'd probably agree with you. I got to the part where I couldn't throw a football. I didn't have to throw a football for 6 years. And then they come in one day and they're like, all right, we need you to throw this perfect pass to this person, out of the blue. And there's no room to be like, oh, wow, you just winged it over his head. You get one shot. And I think the pressure part is good, but then also it's practice, right? It's those reps and it's those pieces of being like, all right, I haven't thrown the ball since I've been a sophomore, and I threw a ball in one game in college. I hadn't thrown a ball as a quarterback since a sophomore in high school. So it wasn't one of those deals. And I think my mindset at that point was like, I can't put any more negative pressure on myself. Like, you're not doing anything to me. You're just basically just push it at the last inch into burying my head in the ground. I'm already 3/4 the way there. You're just basically like pushing it over the top. So it was
like you're almost trying to, like at that point, it's basically setting you up for a failure, right? Don't give you any reps, don't give you a heads up, throw you in a situation, and it's shocking. Oh, you struggle or fail. Yeah, but if you look at the whole setup, what did you expect was going to happen, right? So from that standpoint, it's kind of like there is a logic to how these things happen. You want to set your guys up for success. And if you didn't set them up for success, you take credit and blame for it and say, look, I put you in a bad spot. My bad. We're going to do this now to get ready. We're going to run this play. We're going to do it tomorrow. So from now till tomorrow, let's practice this, right? That's how you should do it. Not just like, well, you had your chance and we're never going to trust you again. But come on, anyone would fail in that situation. The
I
circumstances
guess, but
were set
maybe,
up for that.
but maybe not. Maybe there was just, they were looking for those guys that are like, all right, you're going to be able to perform no matter what the situation is. And yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to think about that mindset of it, because I wasn't set up for success in that regard. I mean, I guess some of it is being preparing for the unpreparable sort of deal. They like, oh, here, we're going to have you kick it on a straight on field goal. Same sort of thing. I guess if I'm playing the full game and warm and all those things, then it's not as big a deal to go in and throw a touchdown pass, right? Probably, where you're walking off basically the street kind of to some degree, and it's like, okay, you're not in the game. You don't know, like you throw your arm forward and it could go straight into the ground, or it could go 6 foot over his head. I think there's that part of knowing, how amped up you are and releasing the ball and all those things, right? I guess thinking about the familiarity of it, that piece. I guess let me ask you this question: how do you feel like you were prepared to go into those situations? I mean, because it's kind of some of the same thing about what we were doing as players, right? And not to call coaches out, but do you feel like you were given those tools to go in and say, well, you might have to kick a field goal to win against Tulsa, right? We had a last second or so pass to win the game, right? I mean, it's like the stuff got real fast. Was that prep close or enough, or even in the same mindset of like, was it so hard to prepare that way? Do you think, what do you think in those terms?
Specifically kicking, I think, at the end of practice, we would do like 2-minute drill and have guys like kick a game-winning field goal and kind of rush out there to kick it. So I think they tried to do that. Hindsight, we probably could have done more types of things like that to prepare us. But I think overall, I never felt like I wasn't ready to do what they wanted us to do. It's just a matter of execution. So in that respect, I think I felt ready, but I think there was also a lot of downtime where we could have done a lot of other stuff to be more prepared. The mental part, I think later we started to have like some work with Aaron McLaughlin,
Yeah,
doing
the
some
visualization
psychology
stuff.
stuff. Yeah, so we started doing some tapes with him, and then we just learned from going to camps and stuff like that, other things we could practice. And so it's like you're left alone a lot to have to figure it out and figure out what works best for you. So if they had the time to work with us the whole time, we didn't have a dedicated kicking coach. So had we had one, I think we could have done better because you could be challenged a little bit more and you're not just left on your own to figure out. And we were all self-motivated and driven and worked hard. So we got better on our own. But if we had like a kicking coach like they do now, I think that could have helped a lot just because you'd have a lot of challenges that you could throw at people. I've worked with some high school kids over the years and I give them lots of drills we never did. Like I'll have them stand on the sidelines and kick field goals where the uprights are like, the uprights behind me, they look at the angle, look about a third of that size. And you practice lining up and kicking at very narrow uprights. And I think later they'd start getting like more narrow uprights for the field goal kicking. And so you're not kicking against college uprights, you're kicking against almost like arena football uprights. And so when you walk out to Kinnick, you're like, wow, these uprights look huge and your confidence is so high because it's like, this is so much easier than I have in practice. So I think there's things like that we could have done or taken advantage of, but at the time I didn't feel underprepared at all. I think everything that was thrown at me, at least, I felt like we had practiced and it was expected. They didn't throw anything strange at us or last second. But yeah, I think looking back, there was so much more things we could have practiced and worked on to get even better. How about you? You feel like you different about that?
No, I think we were prepared, and I think they did what they could, but I think also it was a little eye-opening to talk to Nate Kading and hear his process and how he went through it and how he approached it, and kind of light bulb went off of, oh wow, I didn't think about it in those terms. I didn't get as analytical into it, or whatever that word was that describes what he was talking about of, approaching it the way he did, and I guess the mindfulness in that part. I think to some degree it's a hard thing to prepare for that kind of pressure and spotlight and that piece.
Yeah, you can't simulate that at all, but I think you can put yourself in similar positions. And I think Dane and Hughes really touched on that too, because remember he said they would do all these drills for kickoff return and punt return where he'd like lay on his back and then boom, the punt's up and you get up and you have to figure out where the ball's at. He's like, they made it so hard in practice that when you got in the game, it was easy because you got to watch the whole punt develop. You got to get your bearings. And so I was like, yeah, I don't know if we really made practice harder than the games. We tried to simulate what it was, but games were definitely harder than practice. And I think when he was talking about those exercises, and then, hearing Nate talk about the stuff he did and his mindset, and maybe it developed in the NFL, but that's a different approach. And I think it could have resulted in better outcomes.
And I don't remember exactly, but we did the field goal part, the 2-minute drill and some of those things.
Yep,
So I think there was some pressure and some consequence, right? If you missed as a team or whatever. But I don't think we did that in a punting frame. And I think that probably would have helped me. That would have helped me the most of saying, okay, you need to be prepared to come out right now and you've got one kick, and then you kind of have to process that and deal with what that kick is instead of, oh, I can get in rhythm and I can blast off like 10 of these in a row. And there's
Yep.
the aspect of needing to run the teams and that, but give the guys a look on the protection and the return and all those things.
Yeah,
But
defense
there
has got to
wasn't.
block this punt, and you got to get this punt off.
There
And
was a
did
little
a
bit of
decent job.
that.
I don't think we did that the same way we did the 2-minute drill. No.
I think if I look back, I would have loved to have been like sitting on the sidelines and all of a sudden it's like, okay, hey, 4th down, boom, boom, you're in, you're kicking this one, and that's it. You're off, right? You go off and you've got another. We're gonna do this throughout the day, and I don't know if it makes sense. And maybe it's a tightened down period, but it also is enough time where you're like, okay, you're gonna have to concentrate. This is a mental battle for you for 3 hours to
Yes.
stay loose, to stay focused, and to be able to come in and do one thing at one point. And even just the kicks of the kickover, right? I watch these games and there's a guy that jumps off sides and then like he kicks, and then the guy kicks it again. I was like, you just don't do that thing again, right? That's not a normal piece. Do you prepare for that? I think it's interesting when you talk about kicking from the sidelines to get the view, a skinnier view of the post. One of the things I was thinking about sports realm, my mind kind of goes to these crazy places sometimes, but in the sports realm of like, you think about Steph Curry and him shooting a shot, right? And if you were able to tweak the size of the basket both ways, right? You could make it bigger and you could make it smaller. So let's say you're hot, right? You're really locked in and you're doing well. So you just continue to just sink this thing in. And I suppose like let's say uprights too, right? I'm going to set these small uprights, and if you're on it and you're feeling well and you're confident you smoking it down the middle, it's like, okay, great. We're just going to keep going smaller and smaller and smaller. In reverse of that, let's say you're struggling. Let's say you're hitting them all over the field or all over the post. And so then you start like putting them out farther until it's like, okay, you almost can't miss this. It's an
Yeah.
interesting thing because it's a confidence piece of, oh, I can go out here and do X, and your mind saying, yes, you've got this, you're feeling it, you're doing it, or you're also like, I'm not, I don't feel this, I feel strange, whatever else. And so is it a fact of, could you take those and put the post out wider, and then you kick like 3 or 4, and it's like, okay, Brian, like this is almost impossible to miss. And then you're, oh, okay, I'm back in the rhythm. I feel I get more confidence, and then you start to move it back in. So that process is interesting to me to think about. And I don't know if anyone's tried it, obviously, but to think about if you just were able to kind of move that as the results happen, correct? Like it's whether it's soccer, whether it's basketball, whether it's football, kicking. If you're doing great, then we're going to go smaller. If you're not doing well, then we're going to open it up for you. And okay, you can get your rhythm back and you get your swing back and not be so focused on, oh wow, I didn't get it through.
I think Nate talked a little bit about that, and I started to play around with that a little bit later too, was not treating the upright as good or bad, but treating it as sections or zones, and with the goal that you should be hitting the middle section more and more often, almost like treating it like more points, more credit for the closer you are to the middle, because that's what you're going for. You're trying to hit the ball down the middle. If you don't, you have some leeway, and that's your uprights, but we would just tracked it as it's good or bad. It wasn't like, well, you're a foot off to the left or a foot off to the right and you need to adjust. And you've had 3 of these off to the right. You're doing something wrong in your technique. Instead, it was you had them all 3 good job. So stuff like that, I think, is another level to kind of include more analytics or go to that next level of how do you get better performance out of people. And it's like thinking differently and providing different structures or exercises to do that.
I think it's also mindset too. I think to me, I had a perfection mindset of if I didn't kick this ball 45 yards in a 5-0 hang time or a 4.5 hang time, it was garbage, right? It just doesn't work like that. And ultimately, like what's the output? And does that work, right? You could have a low 37 yarder, but if they caught it and didn't go anywhere, then that's a plus, right? Or you could have a 70, but also get a 30-yard return. And so that's a minus. Or, if it's conditions wise, if you're certain parts of the field, or just thinking about more in a golf sense, here's my field. It's got to stay within the field, but can I drop a shot over here? Can I drop a shot over there? Like think about more as an individual, like max output instead of saying, okay, if it's not on the numbers, this high, this long, then it's a bust. And I think that's probably one of the mindset pieces that I would have done differently, of saying, okay, yeah, I can kick this end over end and it goes on down to the 5-yard line, and okay, perfect, right? It's like functional for situational too, right? Of, if it's end of the game and they're gonna block it to win, you get it out, then it's like, okay, that's good enough, and right, you're not gonna smoke a 50-yarder with 4 or 5 hang time in that situation. It's just not what you needed, or and look at it more in those terms. Let's say you put a bucket over on the right numbers and say, okay, the best guys in the world are going to hit 40 or 70% of these, right? Like, let's say directional wise, the best guys in the world do that how often?
Yeah.
I mean,
6 to 8 times out of 10. Yeah.
6 to 8 times out of 10. So, having that mindset of, oh, okay, I'm not 10 for 10. I'm not going to be. Even if I'm the best and the best of the best, I'm only going to be 80%. I think that mindset maybe hurt me a lot. I was thinking, oh my God, I have to be the absolute best ever. Perfect. And if I was like, this is what normal is, this is what good is, and this is what great is, and then worked its way up. And that's what kind of felt like Nate was doing, is, okay, I'm taking this in chunks, and these little wins I'm celebrating, and these little losses I'm not devastated by. I'm just figuring out how to get them more to the win side. You know what I mean? Like, it's a progression instead of a perfection of every time has to be this. So I think that's hard for me.
Maybe we'll do this again. I mean, after every 20 episodes, just kind of check in and see what we're learning, talk about how it ties in maybe to current events. But hopefully you enjoyed this and found some good nuggets out of it. We'll pick up with some more player interviews and support staff interviews coming up. We got some good people lined up. Subscribe and tell us who you'd like to see on the podcast, and give us some feedback. We're always looking for feedback to continuously improve.
Yeah, thanks for joining, and yeah, leave us comments. Great.
Good or bad.
Good or bad, yeah, exactly. All right, sounds good, sir. Thanks.